I moved into my new apartment in Portland about a month ago. It wasn't anything fancy, just a small one-bedroom place in an old building near downtown. The rent was cheap and the location was perfect for my classes, so I didn't mind the creaky floors or the weirdly thin walls. But from the very first night, something felt off. The windows in my living room were huge, stretching almost from floor to ceiling. Great for natural light during the day, but at night, a nightmare. They faced directly onto the street, meaning anyone walking by could look straight inside. I didn't think much of it at first, until I noticed him. It was late, probably around 11 p.m. I was unpacking some boxes when I got this strange feeling, like someone was watching me. You know that gut instinct? The one that makes your skin crawl even before your brain catches up? That's what I felt. I turned my head slowly toward the window, and there he was. A man, tall, standing completely still on the sidewalk across the street. I couldn't see his face clearly in the dim streetlight, but I knew he was looking right at me. I froze. My mind raced through possibilities. Was he just some random guy passing by? A neighbor? Or something else? Then, just as suddenly as I noticed him, he turned and walked away. No rush, no hesitation. Like he had all the time in the world. I told myself I was overthinking it. Maybe I was just tired from moving, but that night I barely slept, and the next day I bought some curtains. But even with the windows covered, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. And I was right. A week later, I was walking home from the library. It was late again, around 10 p.m. The streets were quiet, just the occasional sound of cars in the distance. That's when I noticed footsteps behind me. At first I thought nothing of it, but after a few blocks I realized whoever it was. They weren't just walking, they were matching my pace. I glanced over my shoulder. A man, the same height, the same build as the one I had seen outside my window. My stomach twisted. I picked up my pace. So did he. I was nearly running by the time I reached my building, fumbling with my keys, heart pounding. I yanked the door open and slammed it shut behind me. My hands were shaking as I turned the lock. And then, through the peephole, he was there, standing at the bottom of the steps, looking up at me. We stared at each other through that tiny, distorted lens for what felt like forever. Then, without a word, he turned and walked away. I didn't sleep that night, but this was only the beginning. The next morning, I woke up to something that made my blood run cold. A white envelope. It had been slipped under my door sometime during the night. No postage, no return address. Just my name, scrawled in shaky handwriting across the front. I hesitated before opening it, my fingers trembling. Inside was a single piece of paper. 5 words. Did you see me yesterday? I felt sick. My hands clenched the note so tightly that the paper crumpled. My mind raced. How did he get inside the building? Did he follow someone in? Had he been watching me all night? I didn't want to overreact, but this wasn't normal. This wasn't just some coincidence. Someone had found out where I lived. Someone had been inside my building, just inches from my door while I slept. I spent the rest of the day installing extra locks and placing a heavy chair against the door before going to bed. It made me feel a little better. But not much. That night, I barely slept. Every creak of the old floorboards, every rustle of the wind outside sent my heart racing. I kept my phone in my hand, ready to call someone, anyone, if I heard something. Then, just after 3 a.m., something made me sit up straight in bed. A sound, a light tapping. I held my breath, ears straining. It was faint, rhythmic. It took me a second to realize where it was coming from. The window. I reached for my phone, fumbling in the dark, and turned on the screen. My reflection in the black glass was the only thing I could see. But I knew I wasn't alone. I forced myself to inch closer, my heart hammering against my ribs. My hands were sweating as I peeked through the blinds. Nothing. Just the streetlights casting eerie shadows across the sidewalk. No one was there, but that didn't make sense. I heard it. I felt it. I tried to convince myself it was just my mind playing tricks on me, but deep down, I knew better. Something was wrong. So the next day, I bought a small security camera and pointed it toward the window. If something happened again, I'd have proof, and something did happen. The next morning, I reviewed the footage. At first, everything seemed normal, just an empty street, the occasional car passing by. But then, around 3:12 a.m., he appeared. The same man. He stepped into frame slowly, almost deliberately, and stood in front of my window. Not moving, not knocking, just watching. Then he raised his hand and placed it flat against the glass. I felt like I couldn't breathe. For a full 5 minutes he stayed there, his face hidden in shadow, and then he started whispering. The camera didn't pick up any sound, but his lips moved over and over, forming the same word. Madison. I slammed my laptop shut and grabbed my phone. It was time to call the police. I didn't waste another second. My hands were shaking as I dialed 911, my voice barely steady as I explained everything. The man, the notes, the video. The officer on the other end took me seriously. Stay inside. Lock your doors. An officer is on the way. I paced the room, heart racing, waiting for the knock. When the police arrived, I practically threw open the door, clutching my laptop with the footage pulled up. 2 officers, one older and serious-looking, the other younger, stepped inside. I played the recording, my fingers gripping the table as I watched their reactions. The younger officer looked disturbed, but the older one, his expression shifted into something worse. Something like realization. "Are you sure you don't know this guy?" he asked. I shook my head violently. "No, I've never seen him before. I swear." He didn't say anything at first, just rewound the video and paused at a specific moment. "Look at the reflection in the window," he said, pointing at the screen. I leaned in, and my blood turned to ice. There, faint but unmistakable in the glass, was another figure. Behind me, inside my apartment, a dark silhouette, just barely visible in the reflection. My breath caught in my throat. The officers exchanged glances. "We need to check the place," the older one said, already pulling his flashlight. I followed them, my stomach in knots as they went through every room, every closet. Nothing. Then one of them pulled the attic hatch. The second the door swung down, a horrible, rotting smell filled the air. I covered my nose as the officer climbed up. His flashlight scanned the darkness, sweeping over piles of dust and insulation. Then suddenly, he cursed. I felt my legs go weak when he pulled something into the light. A sleeping bag, a half-empty water bottle, crumpled food wrappers, a knife. Someone had been living there, for who knows how long. My knees buckled. Oh my God. That's when I remembered the note. "Did you see me yesterday?" I had been terrified of the man outside my window. But the real horror, the real monster had been inside my home the entire time. I was 17 when this happened. My parents were out of town, so I was staying at my older brother Derek's house in Portland, Oregon. It wasn't a big house, just a small, one-story place in a quiet neighborhood. His 9-year-old daughter, Harper, was thrilled I was there. We spent most of the evening watching old cartoons until she finally passed out in her room. Derek and I stayed up a little longer, just talking. He seemed a little off that night, checking the front window more than usual, looking at his phone but not really reading anything. At one point, I asked if everything was okay. He gave me a half smile and said, "Yeah, just tired." I went to bed around midnight, but I kept waking up. The house felt off, like something was waiting. Around 3 a.m., I woke up again. This time I heard something, a soft, dragging noise from the front of the house. At first, I thought Derek was up getting a drink, but then I heard a voice. A deep, gravelly voice. Not Derek's. I got up quietly and peeked down the hallway. That's when I saw him. A man was sitting on the couch, right by the front door, talking to Derek in a low, serious tone. He was older, maybe late 50s, early 60s, wearing a dirty, oversized coat. His face was pale, his hair messy, and his hands. I swear I saw something dark smeared on them. Something wasn't right. Then he turned his head, and he saw me. His eyes locked onto mine, and a slow smile spread across his face. Not the kind of smile you'd expect from an old friend. This was something else. Derek turned to look at me, and for a split second, I saw it. Fear. Pure, unmistakable fear. The man leaned back into the couch and chuckled. "Didn't know you had company tonight, Derek." I didn't move. I didn't know who he was or why he was there, but something in my gut told me not to turn my back on him. Derek cleared his throat. "Yeah, my little brother's staying over. He's no trouble." The man nodded slowly, then reached into his coat. I felt my stomach drop. But instead of a weapon, he pulled out a cigarette and lit it, inhaling deeply before exhaling a long cloud of smoke. "Relax, kid," he said, staring at me like he was sizing me up. "Just an old friend catching up." Old friend? Derek never mentioned him. The man reached into his pocket again and pulled out a rusty revolver, casually placing it on the table between them. "Y'all trust me, don't you?" Derek tensed. My legs felt like concrete, but I forced myself to move, slowly, carefully, toward the kitchen. I needed something, anything, in case this went bad. Then, Harper's bedroom door creaked open. A chill ran through me. The man's head snapped toward the hallway. "Derek," he said, his voice suddenly sharp. "Who else is here?" Derek didn't hesitate. "Just me and my brother," he said quickly. Harper, thank God, didn't step into the living room. Instead, I saw her small shadow move toward the bathroom. She hadn't seen him yet. The man, Red, as Derek had called him, narrowed his eyes but said nothing. He leaned forward, picking up the revolver and spinning it slowly on the table. My chest felt tight. "You know," Red muttered, flicking his cigarette ash onto the carpet. "I always wonder how people act when they know it's their last night alive. Some beg, some fight, some just sit there and cry." He glanced at Derek. "Which one do you think you'd be?" Derek's jaw tightened. I could see his hands gripping his knees. He was holding himself together by a thread. Red let out a laugh, shaking his head. "Relax, man. I'm just messing with you." He reached into his coat again, and I held my breath. But this time it wasn't a weapon, it was a crumpled up newspaper. He tossed it onto the table. "Take a look, kid." I didn't want to, but my eyes dropped to the page. The headline made my blood run cold. "Double homicide in Gresham. Suspect still at large." Underneath it, a blurry surveillance photo of Red. I couldn't breathe. "You know what's funny?" Red mused, tapping the revolver on the table. "I met these two last night. Real nice couple. Shame what happened to them." He leaned closer, his eyes locked onto mine. "Ever seen a head pop like a watermelon, kid?" I felt sick. My stomach twisted so hard I thought I might throw up right there. Derek let out a shaky laugh, trying to keep things light. "Red, man, you're always full of stories." Red stared at him for a long moment, then grinned. "Yeah, stories." I heard the bathroom door click open. Harper was coming out. I panicked. I had to do something. Anything. To keep her from walking in. Derek must have been thinking the same thing. "Hey, Red," he said quickly. "You know I don't allow smoking in the house. Why don't you take that out to the porch?" Red glanced at his cigarette, then at Derek. He exhaled slowly. "You scared of me, Derek?" Derek didn't blink. "I just don't want my niece breathing that in." Red went quiet. He flicked his cigarette to the floor, grinding it under his boot. Harper was walking toward the living room. Then, Red smiled. "You're good people, Derek. I like you." He stood up, grabbing his gun and tucking it back into his coat. "I should get going. Cops are probably looking for me by now anyway." Derek and I both stood as he made his way to the door. Harper stopped in the hallway, watching him with wide eyes. "Is the scary man leaving?" she asked innocently. Red turned his head, and for a split second, I thought he might change his mind, but he just chuckled. "Yes, sweetheart, I'm leaving." Derek opened the door, and Red stepped out. We stood there watching through the window as he got into his car and drove away. Then Derek bolted for the phone. "Call 911, now." Derek's hands were shaking as he dialed. I could barely hear what he was saying, something about an armed suspect, a murder in Gresham, a man named Red. My body felt numb. Harper stood beside me, still in her pajamas, watching us with wide, confused eyes. "Uncle Derek, why was that man scary?" she asked softly. I forced a smile. "Just a weird guy, Harp. Nothing to worry about." But inside I was screaming. 10 minutes later, sirens filled the quiet neighborhood. 2 cop cars pulled up in front of the house, their lights flashing against the windows. An officer stepped out, hand already on his gun. Derek met them outside while I stayed in the hallway, making sure Harper stayed put. I heard Derek repeating Red's name, giving a description, telling them about the gun, the newspaper, the way he talked about the murders like it was nothing. One of the officers pulled out a radio. "We need an APB on a male suspect mid-50s driving a silver." Then he stopped. His radio crackled. "Suspect down. Silver sedan located at a motel on 82nd. Fatal gunshot wound to the head. Over." I froze. Red was dead. Derek looked back at me, just as confused. The officer lowered his radio and sighed. "Looks like someone got to him first." A cold, creeping feeling settled in my stomach. But then the cop said something that made my blood turn to ice. "One more thing. We found something in his coat pocket." He held up a crumpled piece of paper in a plastic evidence bag. Derek took it, his fingers trembling as he unfolded it. There, in Red's messy handwriting, was our address. He had planned to come back. I don't know what stopped him. Maybe something changed his mind. Maybe he just wanted to scare us, or maybe he wasn't planning on leaving us alive. But one thing still haunts me to this day. When the cops searched the motel room, they found something else. A list. A list of names. And Derek's name was the next one down. I don't know why we thought a late-night road trip was a good idea. Maybe it was the excitement of being on our own. Or maybe it was just the eerie thrill of driving through the middle of nowhere. My cousin Josh and I were heading to Des Moines to visit our grandmother. A last-minute decision after our parents got caught up with work. We took my grandfather's old Ford, the kind of car that still had a tape deck and a radio that barely worked. The drive was supposed to take a little over 3 hours, mostly down long, empty highways lined with endless fields of corn. Iowa at night can feel isolating, the kind of quiet that makes you hyper-aware of every little sound. It was just after midnight when I saw him. At first I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. A tall figure standing in the middle of the cornfield, partially hidden between the stalks. He was completely still. Too still. "Josh," I said, nudging him. "Do you see that?" He glanced out the window and laughed. Probably just a scarecrow, but something felt off. Scarecrows don't stand that close to the road, and they don't watch you. I kept my eyes on the figure until we passed it, and that's when my stomach dropped. It was gone. I didn't say anything at first. Maybe I had imagined it. But then 5 minutes later I saw him again. This time he was on the side of the road. Josh saw him too. His hands tightened on the wheel. That's weird. The figure stood just beyond the shoulder, facing us as we sped past. He was wearing a long black coat and a wide-brimmed hat that cast a shadow over his face. I barely caught a glimpse, but it was enough to send a chill down my spine. We drove in silence for a few minutes before Josh finally spoke. "How the hell did he get here so fast?" I had no answer. I didn't want to look anymore, but I couldn't help myself. Every few minutes I scanned the fields, the side of the road, the rearview mirror, and then I saw him again, closer this time. That's when I realized he wasn't just watching us, he was following us. Josh tried to play it cool, but I could see his knuckles turning white around the steering wheel. "We should be there in an hour," he muttered, more to himself than to me. I nodded, forcing myself to focus on the road ahead. The last thing we needed was to get worked up over something that might just be a trick of the dark. But deep down, I knew. This wasn't normal. Then, the car jolted. A loud, thumping noise filled the cabin, and Josh cursed under his breath as he pulled over. "Great," he grumbled. "Flat tire." The realization hit me like a brick. We were stranded, on an empty road, in the middle of nowhere. Josh got out, grabbing the jack and spare tire from the trunk. I followed, holding my phone up as a flashlight. The air was thick with silence. No wind, no crickets, nothing. Then, from the cornfield beside us, movement, a rustling sound, footsteps. "Josh," I whispered. He stopped, wrench in hand. We both turned toward the sound. A shadow shifted between the corn stalks, and then we saw him, standing between the rows of corn, just feet away, watching. Josh didn't hesitate. He dropped the wrench and grabbed my arm. "Get in the car, now." I barely had time to react before he yanked me toward the passenger seat. He ran to the driver's side, fumbling with the door handle. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely close mine. The man stepped onto the road, the hat, the coat, that unnatural stillness. Josh turned the key. The engine sputtered. "No, no, no, no," he muttered, trying again. The man took another step, then another. I could see him more clearly now. His face was wrong, his mouth too wide, like he was grinning just a little too much. His eyes black, empty. The engine roared to life. Josh slammed his foot on the gas. The tires screeched against the pavement, and for a split second, I swore I saw the man's smile widen. Then, we were speeding away, leaving him standing alone in the rearview mirror. But he didn't stay there, because when I looked again, he was still following us. We didn't stop. Not for gas, not to check the tire. Nothing. Josh kept his foot on the pedal, pushing the old Ford faster than it probably should have gone. Neither of us spoke. We didn't have to. The fear sat thick between us, an unspoken agreement that whatever we had just seen, whoever he was not human. The road signs finally told us we were nearing Des Moines. The city lights shimmered in the distance, a relief after miles of darkness. I checked my phone, barely any service, but enough for a text to go through. We pulled up to my grandma's house and parked in her driveway. The second the engine cut off, we both exhaled as if finally allowed to breathe again. Josh reached for his phone. His hands were still shaking. Then his screen lit up. One new message. It was from an unknown number. No name, no context, just an image. A picture of us, on the road, taken from behind, and standing right there, in the middle of the highway, the man in the cornfield. I was 19, freshly single, and honestly, I was kind of reckless. Not in a self-destructive way, but in that I'm young, nothing bad can happen to me way. You know, that kind of dumb confidence that makes you think you're untouchable. At the time, I was really into the whole alternative scene. Black corsets, ripped tights, heavy eyeliner, the works. My friends and I would hit up bars and clubs in downtown Portland, pretending like we belonged there. That's how I ended up meeting Zeke. We matched on some dating app. His pictures were black and white, all moody and artistic. His bio was cryptic, something about philosophy and how not everyone deserves the truth. I thought it was pretentious but intriguing. Plus, he was a bartender at this underground spot on Burnside Street, which made him seem cool in a grungy way. We met up at a small Japanese restaurant. He wasn't bad looking, tall, kind of lanky, dark eyes, but there was something off. He had this quiet, unreadable vibe, The only real thing that stood out about him was his boots, old combat boots worn down to hell with bright red laces. The dinner was fine mostly. He made a couple of weird jokes about women trusting too easily, but I brushed them off. At the end of the night, he walked me to my car, leaned in close and whispered, "I really hope I see you again, Amber." I don't know why, but the way he said my name sent a chill down my spine. The text started right away. At first it was normal, had fun tonight and we should hang out again. But then they got strange. He asked me weird, random things like, "Have you ever wondered how many people disappear in this city every year?" Or, "If I left a gift outside your door but you didn't know where it came from, would you still open it?" I laughed them off, assuming he was just being edgy. One night he sent me an audio message. It was just breathing, heavy, slow, almost like a low growl, then a short, quiet laugh. I stared at my phone, heart pounding. "What was that?" I texted. A few seconds later, his reply popped up. "You think you understand me, Amber?" That was the last message I answered. After ignoring his text for a few days, I figured he'd get the hint and move on. But then out of nowhere, he sent me a simple message. "Come by the bar tonight. I'll make you something special." I wasn't planning on going. Honestly, I felt weird about him, but my friend Jess convinced me. If he's creepy, we'll just leave. No harm done. So we went. The bar was packed, dimly lit with a faint smell of old wood and cigarettes. Zeke was behind the counter, effortlessly making drinks while barely looking at the customers. When he spotted me, he grinned, but there was something unsettling about the way his eyes lingered. He made me a drink without asking what I wanted. I hesitated before taking a sip. "Relax," he said. "If I wanted to drug you, I wouldn't be so obvious." Jess shot me a look. I forced a laugh. We stayed for a while, talking to other people, but I could feel Zeke watching us. After a bit, I excused myself to the bathroom. When I came back, Jess was pale, gripping her glass so tight her knuckles were white. Zeke stood up from the booth where they had been talking and disappeared into the back of the bar. "We need to leave, now." Jess grabbed my arm, her voice shaking. We practically ran to my car. As soon as we got in, I turned to Jess. "What the hell happened?" She was breathing hard, staring at the windshield like she was trying to process something. Then she turned to me and whispered, "He told me what red laces mean." I frowned. "What?" "It's a symbol. It means you've killed someone." My stomach dropped. "That's a joke, right?" I said, my voice weaker than I wanted it to be. Jess didn't laugh. She just shook her head. He looked at me and said, "Do you think she knows?" Then he pointed at his boots. And he smiled, Amber, like he was enjoying watching me put it together. I felt sick. That night I went down an internet rabbit hole. Turns out Jess wasn't wrong. Red laces in combat boots are a known symbol for violence. I didn't sleep. The next day, I tried calling the bar. They told me no one named Zeke had ever worked there. Then I checked my texts. His number was no longer in service. Zeke was gone. A few days passed and I started convincing myself it was all just some sick joke. Maybe he was messing with us. Maybe he liked the attention. Maybe I was overreacting. Then one morning, I found an envelope slipped under my door. There was no name, no return address. Just a plain, yellowed envelope. My hands were shaking as I opened it. Inside, there was only one thing: a pair of dirty, red shoelaces. My breath caught in my throat. The laces were old, frayed at the edges and slightly damp, like they had been dragged through the mud. I dropped them on the floor like they were burning my skin. That's when I noticed the writing on the back of the envelope. Scribbled in messy, uneven handwriting were the words, "I liked you, Amber. Too bad your friend was there." My stomach twisted. I locked every door, shut every window, and called the police. They told me there wasn't much they could do. No crime had been committed. No real evidence. The number was disconnected. The bar had never heard of him. It was like he never existed. That night, I barely slept. Every creak, every shadow outside my window made my heart race. And then, the news came. The next morning, I opened my phone and saw the headline, "Body found in Portland forest. Young woman unidentified. No shoes. Evidence suggests foul play." The article included a blurry crime scene photo. The ground was muddy, disturbed, like something had been dragged through it. And in the corner of the image, barely noticeable, was a pair of combat boots with no laces. I don't go on dating apps anymore. And sometimes when I'm walking alone at night, I swear I hear slow, heavy footsteps behind me. And when I turn around, there's nothing there. I live alone in a small apartment near Green Lake in Seattle. It's nothing fancy, just a studio with a tiny kitchen and a couch that doubles as my bed most nights. I work late shifts at a local bar, so I'm usually dead tired by the time I get home. That night was no different. It was just past 2 a.m. when I finally got into bed. The city was quiet, except for the occasional sound of cars passing by. Just as I was about to drift off, I heard a knock at the door. Not a loud, urgent knock, just a soft, steady tapping, like someone who didn't want to wake the whole building but really wanted me to open up. I froze. No one visits me this late. No one should be at my door at this hour. I reached for my phone and checked the security cam on my app. The screen showed nothing. Just an empty hallway dimly lit by the flickering light above my door. Another knock. This time a little louder. Then my phone vibrated with a message from an unknown number. "Why aren't you answering, Logan?" My heart nearly stopped. I never gave my number to anyone outside of work and my close friends. How the hell did they know my name? I sat up in bed, trying to steady my breathing. The knock came again, firmer this time. I switched back to the security feed and rewound the footage a few seconds. That's when I saw it. At the edge of the frame, someone was just barely visible, a hooded figure standing to the side of my door, just out of sight from the peephole. A chill ran down my spine. Then, movement. Another figure, a woman, stepped into the frame. She had long, unkempt hair and was wearing an oversized hoodie. But what sent ice through my veins was what she was holding, a small metallic object. She leaned toward the door, pressing her ear against it. My phone buzzed again. "If you don't open, we'll come in anyway." That was enough for me. I jumped out of bed and locked the deadbolt, then the chain, then the extra security latch I installed after hearing about break-ins in the area. I tried calling 911. No signal. That's when I heard it, something scratching against the air vent above me. A faint, raspy whisper followed. "We just want to talk, Logan." My body locked up. That whisper, it wasn't coming from the door. I looked up at the air vent above my bed, my breath catching in my throat. The apartment complex had an old ventilation system that connected several units, but there was no way someone could be in there. Right? Then I saw it. A hand. Thin, pale fingers gripped the metal slats of the vent, just for a second, then disappeared back into the darkness. I stumbled backward, my pulse hammering in my ears. My brain was screaming at me to do something, but I could barely process what I'd just seen. The knocking at the door stopped. Silence. And then, "You shouldn't have looked, Logan." The voice wasn't coming from my phone. It wasn't coming from the vent. It was right outside my window. I turned so fast I nearly tripped over my own feet. My apartment was on the 3rd floor. No balcony, no fire escape on this side. But something, was standing outside the window, pressed against the glass. A face. Distorted. Stretched, like a reflection in warped glass. It smiled. Then my phone vibrated. I didn't want to look, I really didn't. But my hands moved on their own like I was in a nightmare, and when I glanced down at the screen, my stomach dropped. A picture, taken from inside my apartment. The angle was from behind me, right where my closet was. We're already inside. My chest clenched. I spun around, eyes darting to my closet door. It was slightly open, just an inch, but enough for someone to be watching me. I ran, didn't think, didn't hesitate. I grabbed my keys and bolted for the door, and that's when I heard it. The closet door creaking open, a single footstep, and then the lights went out. Darkness swallowed the apartment. For a second, there was only silence. No knocking, no whispers, just the sound of my own ragged breathing. I fumbled for my phone, using the dim glow of the screen to guide me toward the door. My fingers shook as I unlocked it. Then, a breath. Right behind me. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. My body was frozen, every instinct screaming at me to run, but something deep inside me knew that if I turned to look, if I actually saw whatever was behind me, I wouldn't be leaving this apartment at all. My phone buzzed again. Another message. "You're making this too easy." That's when I heard the closet door slam shut behind me. It broke the spell. I lunged for the handle and yanked the door open, practically throwing myself into the hallway. My bare feet slapped against the cold floor as I sprinted toward the stairwell, skipping steps, nearly falling with every breathless second. When I burst into the lobby, I saw the van. A black van, engine idling at the curb. The same van I'd noticed before, parked a few buildings down. And standing right next to it, them. The hooded man, the woman with tangled hair, and a third figure, taller than the others, standing completely still under the dim streetlight. They weren't running after me. They weren't yelling or chasing. They were just watching. I stumbled backward, my hands shaking as I dialed 911. This time, the call went through. 911, what's your emergency? I was gasping for air. There are people outside my apartment. They tried to break in. They sent me pictures from inside my place. Stay where you are, the dispatcher said. Officers are on their way. But as I looked up again, the van was gone. No sound of an engine, no screech of tires, just empty street. The police arrived a few minutes later. They checked my apartment. No signs of forced entry, no footprints, no evidence. And my security footage? Corrupted. The only file left was one single frame. A still image of my bedroom, taken from inside the closet. No people, no shadows, just an open window. I haven't stayed in that apartment since. The police said it was probably a prank. Maybe someone had been stalking me, trying to scare me. But I know what I saw. And sometimes late at night I still wake up to my phone vibrating with messages from an unknown number. You left too soon, Logan. We weren't finished playing. It was just another Saturday afternoon. The kind where the sun was out, kids were laughing, and parents sat on benches scrolling through their phones. I had taken my two kids, Mia, 7, and Theo, 4, to the playground at Central Park. Mia was a ball of energy, darting toward the jungle gym, while Theo, my sweet boy, stayed in his own little world, gently rocking back and forth on the swing. Theo is autistic. He doesn't talk much, but he has his own way of communicating, little phrases only I understand. He's never been interested in other kids, just the way the wind moves through the trees, or how the sand feels between his fingers. I love watching him. It's like he sees the world in a way none of us can. I was keeping an eye on them both when a man sat down on the bench next to me. Late 40s, dark jeans, gray hoodie. He had that casual air about him, like he belonged there, like he had every reason to strike up a conversation with me. "That your little guy?" he asked, nodding toward Theo. I hesitated. "Yeah." "He autistic?" I felt my stomach tighten. It wasn't an uncommon question, but something about the way he asked it made me uneasy. "Yes, he is," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "My nephew's autistic too. He's 3, the man said, smiling slightly. "Hard to keep up with him, huh?" I forced a polite nod, but I didn't like where this was going. "How old was he when you found out?" 2, almost 3. He nodded, watching Theo swing back and forth, back and forth. "Does he go to regular classes or—" I hesitated. Why did he need to know? But then, he had a nephew, right? Maybe he was just looking for information. "He's in a special needs class," I said cautiously. What school? A red flag. I shrugged. There are a few good programs in the district. He didn't press it, but he looked down at Theo's ankle, where his GPS tracker was strapped securely. That's one of those tracking devices, isn't it? My heartbeat picked up. Yeah, just in case, I muttered, shifting on the bench. The man's eyes lingered on Theo. Does he run off a lot? Sometimes. That was it. That was the moment my body screamed at me. Get away from this man. I stood up, calling out to Mia. Time to go, honey. She groaned, running over. Why? We just got here. Because we have stuff to do, I said quickly, picking up Theo. He didn't resist. He rarely did. But I could feel the man's eyes on me the whole time. As we walked away, Mia looked up at me, confused. Is it because of that man? My stomach dropped. What do you mean? He told me his name is Greg, but his niece said he's her mom's boyfriend. I stopped dead in my tracks. My hands went cold. He had lied. I turned my head slightly, just enough to see that Greg was still sitting on the bench staring at us. Something was seriously wrong, and I had a feeling we hadn't seen the last of him. That night I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling from the park. Something about that man, Greg, felt off. The way he asked about Theo, the way he watched him, and most of all, the way he lied about the little girl being his niece. I tried to tell myself I was overreacting. Maybe I was just being a paranoid mom, but then around 9 p.m. I checked the security camera feed for my apartment building, and my blood ran cold. A black sedan parked right outside, not moving, just sitting there. I stared at the screen, heart pounding. It couldn't be him. It couldn't. But the shape of the car, the color, everything, it matched. I watched for another 5 minutes before it finally pulled away. Still, I barely slept that night. The next morning, I tried to shake it off. Mia had school, and I figured I'd take Theo out for breakfast at our favorite little cafe, a place just a few blocks away. It was small, cozy, the kind of spot where regulars smiled at you when you walked in. I chose a table near the window, keeping Theo close. He was humming softly, lining up sugar packets in a perfect row. And that's when I saw it. A black sedan, parked across the street. My chest tightened. I told myself it was just a coincidence. New York was full of black sedans. But then, the driver's door opened, and Greg stepped out. I felt like I couldn't breathe. He wasn't looking at me. Not yet. He was just there, leaning against a lamppost, pretending to check his phone. But I knew better. I knew he was waiting. I grabbed Theo's hand. Time to go, buddy. He resisted, focused on his sugar packets. Whittle wobbles, he mumbled. I scooped him up, hurrying toward the back exit. My mind was racing. I needed to get home. I needed to call someone. I needed to get away. But before I turned the corner, I made one last mistake. I looked back. Greg was staring right at me and smiling. I ran all the way home. My hands were shaking as I fumbled with the keys, practically throwing the door shut behind me. Theo, oblivious to my panic, curled up on the couch, rocking gently. I grabbed my phone and called 911. I think someone is following me, I blurted, breathless. A man. He was watching me at the park yesterday, and today he was outside my building. And now he was outside the cafe where I was with my son. The dispatcher's voice was calm. Do you have a description? I gave them everything. The name he had given me. The black sedan. The little girl who wasn't actually his niece. We're sending an officer to your location, the dispatcher said. I hung up and went to check the apartment's security camera feed again. And there it was. The black sedan. Parked right outside. My stomach dropped. My hands clenched into fists. This wasn't just some creep who got too chatty at the park. This was planned. Minutes later, red and blue lights flashed across my window. A police car pulled up behind the black sedan. I watched from the camera as two officers approached it, tapping on the driver's side window. The door opened slowly. Greg. He stepped out, hands raised slightly. The officers started questioning him. I turned up the volume on my security feed, trying to hear something, anything. Then one of the officers nodded and walked back toward the police car. They were letting him go. No. No, no, no. My phone rang, and I snatched it up. "This is Officer Cole," a deep voice said. "We spoke to the man outside, and he says he was just waiting for a friend. He doesn't have any warrants or prior complaints against him." I cut him off. "He's lying. He's been following me since yesterday. He knows my son is autistic. He asked me about his school, about his tracker." "I understand your concern, ma'am," Officer Cole said carefully. "But unfortunately, he hasn't committed a crime. However, I strongly advise you to be cautious. If you notice him near your home again, call us immediately." I hung up, my entire body shaking. Cautious? Cautious wasn't enough. I looked back at the security feed. Greg was getting back into his car, looking straight at the camera. And then, he smiled. A slow, knowing smile. Then he drove away. That night, I didn't sleep. The next morning, I took Mia and Theo and left town for a few days, staying at my sister's house in New Jersey. I didn't tell anyone except close family where we were going. When we got back, the black sedan never appeared again. But I never let my guard down. A week later, my brother, a cop in a neighboring county, sent me a text. "Check your email. You need to see this." My stomach twisted as I opened the file. A mugshot. Greg. My brother's department had been investigating him for weeks. He had been caught trying to lure a nonverbal child away from his mother at a playground in Queens. I felt sick. The police found out he had been doing this for years, targeting families with autistic children, kids who wouldn't be able to communicate what had happened to them. And I had almost given him everything he needed to know about Theo. I wish I could say I feel safe now, but the truth is, I don't. People like him don't just stop. So if you ever get that feeling, the one that tells you something isn't right, trust it. Because I did. And I think it saved my son's life.